I'll ask our guests to kind of turn their cameras on and unmute themselves.
Alan, I'm kind of sad that we had to end that super lovely music that was playing.
Actually, it was very relaxing, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's what I need on a Wednesday morning.
I can share the playlist with you, Jonny. That's not a problem.
Thank you.
This guy is called Poolside. It's really good lounge music. Very nice, sure.
Yeah,
loving it.
Yeah,
good stuff. Well, thanks everyone, first of all, to our guests for tuning in. Thanks for being here today. We're excited to have you. Before we start, I'll just let everyone know we're going to be recording today's session. And first of all, I'm just going to introduce our CX for Growth webinar series that we're running. So we're running from the team here, the Intercom for Startups team. I'm really going for kind of a casual interview style with special guests each month, talking about different customer experience topics that'll help you drive growth in your business. So grab a coffee, settle in for today's conversation. We have great guests here from Mercury and Wefunder. And today we're focusing on community funding, how to deepen your relationships, your customer relationships by allowing your customers to invest in your business. So we'll hear from Mercury how they raised a round on Wefunder, ways to unlock this valuable source of investment and customers for your startup, and then where we see community funding going in 2022. So I'm going to go around the screen and let everyone introduce themselves. I'll start with myself. I'm Alan McGlinchey, based here in San Francisco. I partner with VC firms globally and then promote Intercom to the startup ecosystem. So I'll pass it to my colleague Pedro to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm also here at the Intercom team. I look over our startup team and strategy to make sure that we build the right programs to ensure that founders get access to our tools on a discounted price for the first year until they get traction. And I'll pass to you, Lucia.
Hey, I'm Lucia Qian. I'm head of BizOps at Mercury. Just kind of do a variety of different things as one does at a startup. And Mercury is a business banking stack for startups.
And Jonny Price, I'm the VP of Fundraising at Wefunder. Wefunder is a platform that lets anyone invest in startups they love, not just accredited investors, and lets founders raise capital from their customers and community, as well as rich people. I've been here for 4 years. Before that was at a nonprofit called Kiva.org, where I ran their US lending program for 7 years, and originally from the UK. So apologies if I drop words like fortnight and pavement into the next few minutes here.
That's okay. With my Irish accent as well, we'll probably have a few common terms. Jonny, it'd be great to understand a bit of a high level about Wefunder and where it's come from, and just to get us started and kind of set the scene.
Yeah, so Wefunder has now been around for 10 years. Our founders, when they launched the company, were frustrated that they were entrepreneurs themselves and had a lot of, smart friends that were building cool companies. They wanted to invest in those companies, but the securities laws of America didn't let them because they weren't accredited. They weren't millionaires. And so they said, this isn't very fair and it's not very American. Why should I be able to invest in public companies on the stock market, but I can't invest in my, smart friends cool SaaS startup? And so along with a few other people, they set about trying to lobby Congress to change the laws, and they were successful. So in 2012, the Jobs Act passed Congress. Part of that was what's called regulation crowdfunding. And regulation crowdfunding is now a new law that allows anyone to invest in startups, not just accredited investors. The SEC took a few years to roll it out. They did that in 2016. And then crucially, a year ago, in March of 2021, the SEC made some improvements to the laws where now startup founders can raise $5 million per year. They can roll individual investors up to 1 SPV on their cap table. And so since then, we've seen significant growth of Wefunder and of this community round sector. But that's the historical context and why a lot of people will say, how can unaccredited investors invest? That's the law, regulation crowdfunding, relatively new law.
Okay. Where did, not dig into it too far yet, but where did the the protection of accredited investors come from? Is that just a legacy of, you know, some old systems, or what was the?
I think so. I mean, that securities law was from the 1930s, and I think back then, before the internet, it was easier for scammers and con artists to take unsophisticated investors for a ride. I think now, you know, with kind of millions of eyeballs on campaigns, the internet has really kind of reduced the risk of that happening. And still it's a risk, right? And still there's obviously the SEC is regulating this, and hence there are limits on how much individual investors can invest, limits on how much companies can raise. There are financial disclosure requirements that go along with running a community round. But I think the internet solves a lot of those challenges that existed, 80 years ago.
And probably create some new ones as well along the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Lucia, I guess it'd be great to hear a bit about Mercury, as a business and where it's come from, and you know, the type of customers it serves as well.
Yeah, it's basically business banking for mostly focused on startups. Our CEO and co-founder Ahmad was a serial entrepreneur, and so one of the big pain points that he had as an entrepreneur was just dealing with banks, even just opening up a bank account. I think for a while he was based somewhere outside the US, but trying to just open up a US bank account was extremely difficult. You know, had to just go into a physical branch, which was, you know, not possible. And especially that's been invalidated in times of COVID as well. But yeah, just trying to make this kind of very essential thing that everyone has to do as a business, easier and simple and straightforward, and just like a nice modern tool that, you know, startups like using, just like everything else that they use in their stack.
I've seen your demo, and it's like any modern consumer tool you'd be so used to. It's just intuitive and smart. Yeah. I had a similar experience. I moved to Canada years ago with a company, and I was the first person on the ground, and trying to open a business bank account. It took us weeks, maybe months even, to get it figured out in the end. But I can hear those challenges. I suppose while we're on that, like, it'd be great to understand, Lucia, why Mercury decided to raise a community round, and you know why or how and why, should I say, that they kind of focused on it.
Yeah, mostly it's because our customers wanted it, and we saw that natural alignment between us and our customers as being sort of a beneficial thing to have, strengthened. And I guess maybe if I take a step back, you know, Mercury's a larger startup, and so I think our primary need wasn't for the financing itself, but rather sort of this customer alignment. And, you know, like over the years, customers have actually, made inquiries of, hey, can I be an investor? And, usually we'd have to say no because of that, accredited investor rule. Yeah. So it's something that, is always kind of in the back of our minds. Like, we want to, as a company, we're pretty focused on fostering the startup community. We're focused on startups. We want to build those relationships. So this is sort of a natural, part of the journey for us to not just service our customers from our product, but also bring them into our cap table. And over the years, we've had really just strong organic growth from word of mouth. And we saw that also as an opportunity to, continue that and really strengthen that. So that's probably a primary reason. The timing of it, and, that kind of is because it was sort of enabled by the new crowdfunding regulations that Jonny mentioned. But also at the time we were thinking of raising a traditional VC round anyways. And so that kind of was like a natural, timing wise, it kind of just made sense to do it together.
Are there any additional considerations being in the finance space? Are there any additional kind of considerations when you're kind of thinking about that compared to maybe a more traditional SaaS company or something like that?
What do you mean?
I was just wondering, just because there's more regulations in certain sectors, like, in healthcare, for example, or in finance, was there any other nuances that you had to go through to follow a community round based on your sector?
I don't think so. I'm not sure our sector really made a big difference. Yeah. I think just the allowing us to raise more money, we wanted to do like the full 5 million. We knew that, there was Gumroad was the first company that raised at the new 5 million cap. And so we knew we'd probably hit that pretty quickly. But because we wanted to raise that amount, we knew we had to go through an audit. So I guess that was sort of a factor, a pretty big factor in like, okay, this is something that we know we're going to have to take on. That's going to take a bit of effort, and it's something that otherwise we wouldn't have to do.
One thing for me for Mercury, I think one of the reasons the round was so explosive, and it was the fastest company that's ever hit $5 million, I think, in regulation crowdfunding history, certainly in Wefunder history. And I think it was 5 hours to blow past $5 million. It was a very fun day. We have a Slack channel at Wefunder, and we see every investment come in. And sometimes there are these explosive campaigns. And that was the most fun day to be watching that Slack channel at Wefunder. And we also, like, every time someone invests, we ask them if they want to leave a note for the founder. And the messages that those investors are writing, we also can read. And you just see all these messages raving about Mercury as like an incredible customer experience and, you know, incredible product. And that's why these founders are so excited to invest. So Mercury was explosive, you know, fastest campaign to $5 million. For me, part of the reason why it was such a sweet spot, as well as the fact that you guys had just raised 120 million Series B from K2 and Andreessen. So there was that kind of institutional validation, right? Like to enable people to invest on the same terms as A16Z is not going to do bad things for your ability to raise. But you know, all of your customers are startup founders, right? So I think at the time there's like tens of thousands of startup founders. Probably if there's like one group of people that are going to jump on this chance to invest in your company on Wefunder, it's going to be startup founders. And so you know, they get it, they get startups, they get investing, and they're not yet millionaires. Hopefully one day they will be when the startup IPOs, but like they might be unaccredited. And so for you to go to them and let them invest because of who your customer was, I think that was key. Another good example recently is Replit. So Replit kind of democratizing kind of learning to code. And their users are engineers, right? And so software engineers as well, like really interested in kind of technology, really interested in startups. And so they're probably the second fastest company to $5 million after Mercury. And, you know, I think, again, depending on who your customer segment is, that can really make it in the sweet spot. And if your customer segment is founders or software engineers, those are probably two, you know, really great fits.
No, it makes a huge amount of sense. And like, I suppose, in a way, you probably need to be wary exactly of that customer base, because it's a much more traditional base. Maybe it's not as good of a match. Is that, have you seen others that haven't worked out as well on Wefunder for that reason?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of companies that want to raise $1 million and you know, struggle to get there for a bunch of reasons, right? One is like their growth chart isn't up and to the right, you know. Another is they're not able to dedicate the time to fundraising that they need to. You know, if they have a smaller audience, or they can't kind of persuade investors to invest in them. So there's a lot of reasons that it doesn't work. And certainly, you know, if you're kind of selling to large enterprises, I feel like it's less in the sweet spot than if you're consumer facing, or if you're selling to startup founders, or if your customers are engineers, for example. That's certainly one factor among many. But that being said, you know, we've had many kind of B2B enterprise boring SaaS companies raise very successfully as well. So
some really great boring companies out there, you know.
There's some very boring companies that people really want to invest in. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's for sure. I suppose, you know, did you see, Lucia, from your point of view, did you see it impacting on, you know, customer acquisition or retention metrics or anything like that? Or did you do a deep dive into those type areas?
We saw some level of acquisition, actually. I forget the exact numbers, but, you know, there are some people who invested who at the time weren't customers and ended up starting applications or getting applications approved. So it was pretty exciting. I think retention's a bit like too early to know exactly the impact of that. Like we already have like very high retention already. So I think time will tell if this subset of customers has like even more retention. I think that's kind of something we're probably naturally would expect. But yeah.
Sense. No, that makes sense. And I suppose, I'm just interested, how many customers are we talking, or how many, I shouldn't say customers, how many investors were in the group in total for the 5 million, or do you disclose what that is?
Yeah, I think we had
2,453.
There you go. Okay, thanks, Jonny.
That's a good number of supporters at, maybe a rugby match, a regional rugby match in Ireland. So that's a decent size of people.
yeah, and like vast majority of those were customers. So we did allow like people who weren't customers also into the round, and kind of give different levels of priority and size of investment to, Is that a requirement in the legislation? Do you have to make it available to everyone, or can you just make it available to customers as a kind of perk? Do you know that, John?
You can, so you're basically accepting applications to invest as the team, right? So Mercury can kind of decide, especially, usually if a founder is trying to raise 5 million and it's beggars can't be choosers, right? So if you only raise 3 million, then money's green and maybe you take it all. But if you're heavily oversubscribed, like Mercury was, then you have the ability to decide, which applications to invest you accept, and you can use whatever criteria you want for that. But certainly, whether your customers was pretty prominent for Mercury. But what you're getting at, Alan, is a good point, which is, for Mercury, they had so much demand from their customers to invest that they were able to fill out the $5 million from existing customers if they wanted to. A lot of companies will use Wefunder and run a community round for customer acquisition, as well as existing customer engagement.
Nice. Pedro, I might go to you. Just think about Intercom as the engagement OS. How do you see community funding as an engagement mechanism for startups?
I think this is first of all, a very exciting new product and new vehicle for founders to seek for funding, right? And I think the opportunity here as well is alignment of interest, which was something that consumers had on the public market, right? If I'm a Adidas a shareholder, right? I'll rather buy Adidas products versus Nike, just alignment of interest. And bringing that to the startup ecosystem is even more powerful because you're allowing your customers, which is using your product, and that usage is supporting the growth of your company to also invest. So you're providing those super fans that you're trying to build loyalty, build the best experience in class, giving them another avenue to really engage with your brand and your product. So it's super interesting to bringing this out to the ecosystem, and us that work on the customer experience part now is a challenge. Is that how do you develop those metrics in way for you to measure how does that impact on your business, right? For coming back to a question that you had for Lucia, how do you know the NPS of a Mercury customer that also invests is higher? How do you build that segmentation that you provide maybe extra set of benefits for them, but also being an investor? So there's a lot of new engagement opportunities that comes from this new product, this financial product out there that really can help founders build that loyalty and build that community on a very in-depth way versus just a business transaction of I have a product, you want to buy something from me.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I suppose, thinking about the non-accredited investors, how do you see it impacting them being able to join rounds like this? How do you see it impacting the overall VC market, Jonny, over the next while? And how do you see it kind of evolving?
Yeah, I'm highly biased on this, and I'm generally a very optimistic person. So take this kind of perspective with a grain of salt. But my pretty strong conviction, and certainly very strong hope, is that 2022 will see a significant growth in Wefunder and this kind of way of raising money of community rounds. 2021, as most people on the call probably know, was like an explosive year for early stage VC. PitchBook says there were twice as many early stage VC deals done in 2021 as 2020. And for me, the use case we're talking about on this webinar, for the most part, for a founder is, you engage your customers, right? Mercury gets to engage customers as an customer acquisition play. But in the case of Mercury, didn't need the money, just raised the 120 million Series B. This wasn't about raising capital. This was about delighting your customers, right? The majority of startups on Wefunder, the value proposition, sure, customer engagement is awesome, but actually the primary value proposition is this is an easier way to raise money. Because, now you can publicly promote your offering. Now you can raise from unaccredited investors as well as accredited investors. Accredited investors represent about 50% of investment volume on Wefunder, but now you can raise from the 92% of the population that isn't accredited. You can get in front of Wefunder investors. And so for most startup founders on Wefunder, an easier way to raise more money more quickly is actually the primary value proposition. And so if they were easily able to raise from VCs in 2021 and 2022, it's going to be harder for them to do that. Actually, Wefunder and raising from your community and your customers and our user base actually becomes much, much more valuable.
And product validation as well, or product or service validation, right? And part of that,
yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so I would imagine that we're going to see a lot more founders kind of choose to raise capital in this way in 2022, just because it's going to be harder for them to raise from angels and VCs in a market where kind of early stage investing is cooler than it was last year. But we'll see. But so far, I mean, the last couple of months.
Is the mechanism predominantly only available to US companies, or is it available to global companies, or does it vary by jurisdiction?
It varies by jurisdiction. The regulation crowdfunding laws are just relevant for US-based entities, but we're actually expanding in the EU. The EU have just liberalized these rules around letting everyone invest in startups. So we're going to be launching in the EU soon. That market's going to be exploding. And for those rules, you can actually be based anywhere in the world. But regulation crowdfunding.
I could see in Europe, like having grown up there, that like the idea of cooperatives, I know this isn't a cooperative, but the idea of these forms of businesses have been around for a long time, where it's more community engaged, and that you kind of lean on that idea could be really strong in a market like Europe, Pedro, how do you see it impacting in potentially a tighter VC market over the next while?
I wanted, before I jump into that, I wanted to ask you, Jonny, like, how is the past month going for you guys? Because we're seeing like the funding rounds are slowing down, right? So I wonder, like, were you able to see already that correlation of the current market, people searching for a Wefunder as an alternative? Because businesses are being created, it's just a matter of like where you're getting the funds.
Yeah, April was our biggest ever month by more than 50%. So in terms of being counter-cyclical, that's my hypothesis. Right now it's looking that the data there is kind of proving out that hypothesis. It's still pretty early, but yeah, April was a very, very big month. Replit raised $5 million in a few hours in April, as a couple of other companies that went really big as well. So far, it seems like the data is bearing that out.
That's awesome to hear. That's what I was assuming that was going to happen if like market VCs are getting a little bit more holding up on fundings, and it's just hard to get more liquid right now for investors. So you need to increase the pool of investors that you have to invest in you, right?
And Wefunder is a public benefit corporation, so we're all pretty mission driven. And so for us, it sounds a little trite, but for us, what we're about is like letting everyone invest in startups, not just rich people, but also on the founder side, like by unlocking capital that's in 92% of the population that isn't accredited, can we actually make it easier for founders to raise? Can we get more capital flowing to founders? And so for us as a team, like if in a world where we're coming into an environment where it's going to be harder for startup founders to raise capital they need to build businesses, if our team and this kind of community-based model can be a way of kind of buffering, startup founders against kind of an icy cold market, that's pretty inspiring for us.
And coming back to your question, Ale, I don't think it's going to be an either or in terms of funds. It's a mix, right? We already been seeing a mix happening on early stage with the growth of syndicates, people, accredited investors investing through syndicates and crowdfunding. So it's another alternative that allows a little bit more freedom on the founder's hand as well, to not be holding, not be fully depending on the VC industry. because also something that we need to think about, not every business is fit to a VC business, but might be a business that you can open to your community to be owner and they can pay dividends. It's just I think the boom of startups in the past decades, the VC is becoming more popular as a product, but not necessarily all business needs to go through that. In allowing more investors to invest on the early stage companies, you're like breaking a little bit of the rule of thumb that if my business, for me to have a good business, I need to go through VC.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Improving the diversity of capital along with the diversity of investors and pool of investors globally is only going to be a good thing for everyone, right? So that does make sense. I suppose just before we head towards questions, we see any advice for founders as if they're considering a community funding round, how should they think about it, or any pointers for them to get started?
I think maybe think about like your customer base, like how big, how engaged, and how, what kind of traction you can gain through them. That was just super important to us. I think like thinking about, if you are in a position where you're not in as much need of the financing, but want to do it for customer engagement, kind of aligning that maybe with a traditional round worked well for us because it kind of, combines some of the efforts. And then, it would also just enable us to give the same terms to our community round investors as like our top VCs, which is just a really nice thing for us to be able to do.
Yeah. Great. I might move towards questions here. So I'm just picking one up. Apologies for looking across the screen here, but can angels or large corps invest through Wefunder, or are they considered part of the crowd? So, are organizations able to invest through Wefunder? Are businesses able to?
Yep, totally. So sometimes, VC will want to invest outside of Wefunder, but we certainly allow for, and we've had many institutional investors invest through the platform as well.
Okay, cool. And can cannabis adjacent companies use Wefunder or raise community rounds generally?
Yeah, generally with cannabis, we're pretty restricted by kind of banking regulations. But yeah, if it's not plant touch, there may be something depending on the business model. So certainly, CBD stuff we can do. So worth kind of reaching out for a more kind of specific answer depending on the nature of your specific use case.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think Elon Musk is going to consider a community funding round to fund his Twitter acquisition? Or
if Elon Musk is listening, my DMs are open. I would love to let the people kind of own a piece of Twitter, which they were able to do, I guess, when it was public. Now we should it will be nice if the people could continue to own a piece of Twitter. Now it's private. Sadly, I'm not in direct conversations with Elon yet, but maybe that's about to change.
Let's see. Does anyone see any other questions coming up in the chat there or anything?
While we're waiting, Alan, just one thing, just to pick up on what Pedro was saying before, and Lucia touched on this as well. Like, I think sometimes there's this kind of misperception that it's kind of either a community round or raising from VCs, right? And so I think what we're seeing more and more companies do is what Mercury did, which is you're raising from VCs and also then opening it up to your customers. And ideally, if there's an institutional lead on your Series A or your Series B, and then you allocate part of that round to your customers, you get the benefits of both worlds. Like we think VCs are adding a lot of value, taking a board seat. They've walked the path before. They can add a ton of expertise and advice, etc. But then also we believe there's a lot of value from letting your customers invest, and you definitely don't need to choose one or the other. You can just raise the whole. $5 million is the annual cap. So Mercury couldn't have raised the 120 million from the community, but if you're raising a smaller round, you can do it all just from the customers in the community. But I think for us, best practice oftentimes is to get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I saw you're kind of like your canvassing companies, or I guess people are canvassing companies. How does that work exactly, Jonny?
Yeah, that's a product feature that we rolled out recently, which we think is kind of fun. So the idea is that rather than waiting, for this startup to launch a community round, if their customers kind of start a petition, and more people can say, "Oh, I would love to invest in you," then if it's getting picked up, then we can take that to the founder and say, "Hey, there's $5 million waiting for you here, one. And then two, thousands and thousands of your customers would love to invest in you. Do you want to let them?" And so it's a product feature we rolled out with the launch of the communityround.com website, which we rolled out a month ago. And so we're kind of iterating on, we're kind of not yet sure if it's gonna take off, but we've been having kind of fun playing with it over the last few weeks.
Yeah, for sure. To see we're running on time, so I think first of all I might thank everyone for joining. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully you got value from the conversation today. So really appreciate that. For Wefunder, check out community rounds, check out the Wefunder website. For Mercury, head to the Mercury website, and there's also a demo dashboard they have, which is really cool as well. If you're interested in joining Intercom's early stage program, if you're a startup, head to our website and check that out. It's a super way to utilize Intercom at a great discount for your first year. And for SMEs or general mid-market companies, reach out to our sales team through our chat bot. Next month, we're going to have a session with Chat Desk focused on leveraging social media for your business. So do tune into that webinar. And a big thank you to Pedro, to Lucia, and to Jonny for your insights and time today. Really appreciate it. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye now.